We hope you are thrilled by these original Sherlock Holmes adventures. To help us continue creating them, please consider supporting our Patreon. As a thank you, patrons receive early access to most stories before they launch on YouTube. Your financial contributions are the lifeblood of this channel. The link to our Patreon is in the description below. The Adventure of the Politician, the Lighthouse, and the Trained Cormorant. When I look back upon the crowded years which I have devoted to recording the singular exploits of my friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I find that many of his most remarkable triumphs have been withheld from the public. In some cases, the affairs were of such a delicate and exalted nature that their publication would have shaken the very foundations of the British Empire. In others, the circumstances were so utterly grotesque and outre that the general reading public might well accuse me of abandoning the realm of strict factual reportage for the fanciful flights of penny dreadful fiction. I have recently had occasion to mention the terrible affair of the Abbas Parva tragedy and the curious incident of the veiled lodger. However, even those dark and bizarre chapters pale in comparison to a case which occurred in the early spring of 1896. It was a case which involved a cabinet minister of the highest standing, a remote lighthouse upon the unforgiving coast of Cornwall, and a method of espionage so utterly without precedent that even Holmes, whose encyclopedic knowledge of the history of crime was unrivalled, was forced to admit that it broke entirely new ground. My friend's explicit prohibition has long kept my pen dry upon this subject, but the recent death of the principal actor in this maritime drama, coupled with the passing of the Official Secrets Act limitations, at last permits me to lay the facts before the public. The winter of that year had been a remarkably severe one, but as March gave way to April, the chilling frosts had been replaced by a series of blustering, rain-swept gales that battered the windows of our sitting room at 221B Baker Street. On one such tempestuous evening, I was deeply engrossed in a recent treatise on tropical pathology, while Holmes occupied himself in the corner, enveloped in a thick cloud of blue, acrid smoke from his cherrywood pipe. He was engaged in the malodorous task of conducting a complex chemical analysis, the exact nature of which involved boiling some vile-smelling hydrocarbon over a Bunsen burner. Suddenly Holmes extinguished the flame, cast aside his glass retort, and threw himself into his velvet-lined armchair with a sigh of profound ennui. "The spring weather clears the streets of the more pedestrian criminals, Watson," he remarked, his sharp, hawk-like profile turned toward the window. "London has become singularly devoid of interest. I have perused the morning papers from cover to cover, and aside from a rather unimaginative burglary in Sydenham, there is nothing to occupy a mind that craves the stimulus of the complex and the obscure." "I should think a period of rest would be welcome, Holmes," I replied, closing my book. "Your recent exertions in the affair of the Vatican cameos took a considerable toll upon your constitution." "My constitution is sustained by activity, my dear Watson," he retorted impatiently. "Rust consumes faster than labour wears. When the brain is idle, it begins to devour itself. I require a problem, Watson, a chain of deductive reasoning, a tangled skein to unravel. But alas, the criminal classes have seemingly retired to the countryside to enjoy the blooming daffodils." Scarcely had the words left his lips when the heavy, rhythmic tread of footsteps sounded upon the stairs. They were not the quick, uncertain steps of a distressed client, nor the heavy, measured tread of an official police inspector. These were slow, ponderous, and utterly authoritative. Holmes sat up, his eyes suddenly gleaming with that familiar predatory light. "Unless I am very much mistaken, Watson, the daffodils have brought us a problem of national importance. Only one man in London walks with that particular combination of lethargy and absolute purpose." The door opened, and we were presented with the imposing, majestic figure of Mycroft Holmes. Sherlock's elder brother was a man of immense girth, with a massive domed head and deep-set, extraordinarily perceptive grey eyes that were the exact replica of his younger siblings. Mycroft rarely left his comfortable orbit between his rooms in Pall Mall, the Diogenes Club, and his unnamed yet utterly vital office in Whitehall. His presence at Baker Street was an infallible barometer of a severe crisis. "Ah, Mycroft," said Holmes, gesturing to the armchair opposite mine, "to what do I owe the honour of this disruption of your gravitational pull? I perceive from the mud upon your boots that you have walked from Whitehall, and from the state of your umbrella that you have not stopped at the Diogenes Club." "The matter is too grave for carriages, Sherlock, and too urgent for the club," Mycroft replied, lowering his bulk into the armchair with a heavy sigh. He drew a handkerchief from his pocket and dabbed at his broad forehead. "We are facing a crisis of the most unprecedented nature. If it is not resolved within the fortnight, the naval security of this country will be compromised to a degree that I shudder to contemplate." Holmes rubbed his long, thin hands together. "Pray, Mycroft, enlighten us. Watson, my brother's presence dictates that you reach for your notebook. This will be no ordinary burglary." "It is treason, Sherlock," Mycroft said softly, his voice carrying a chilling weight. "Treason at the highest levels of the Admiralty. You are, of course, familiar with Lord Arthur Cadogan?" "The Under-Secretary for Naval Defence," I interjected. "A brilliant orator, though somewhat solitary in his habits since the death of his wife." "Precisely, Dr. Watson." Mycroft nodded. "Lord Cadogan is intimately involved in the development of the new Dreadnought class of battleships. He possesses full knowledge of the armour-plating specifications, the calibre of the naval guns, and, most crucially, the proposed deployments of our Mediterranean fleet. For the past 3 months, precise, highly technical details of these secrets have been turning up in the hands of the German High Command in Berlin." "A leak," Holmes murmured, his eyes narrowed. "And you suspect Cadogan?" "We more than suspect him, Sherlock. We know it is he. We have intercepted a payment, a massive transfer of funds from a dummy account in Zurich into a trust controlled by Cadogan's nephew. The man is heavily in debt due to disastrous speculations in South African gold mines. He has sold his country to save his estate." "Then arrest him," I said, "if you have the proof of the payment." "We have proof of the motive, Doctor, but not of the method," Mycroft countered, raising a massive hand. "To arrest a peer of the realm and a man of Cadogan's public standing requires absolute, incontrovertible proof of the espionage itself. We must catch him in the act of transmitting the secrets. If we move prematurely, he will deny the association with the trust, the defence will raise a cloud of dust, and the true extent of the leaked documents will remain unknown to us." "You speak of the method," Holmes said, leaning forward. "I assume from your presence here that the method is somewhat obscure." "Obscure? It is frankly impossible," Mycroft declared, an uncharacteristic note of frustration edging his voice. 3 weeks ago, claiming a sudden deterioration of his health, Lord Cadogan retired to his ancestral home. Blackwater Manor. It is a grim, isolated stone fortress situated upon the very edge of the towering cliffs of the Cornish coast, near the village of Penzeath. A mile off the coast from his property lies the treacherous Blackwater Rock, upon which stands an active lighthouse. The topography is brutally simple. Behind the manor lies an expanse of open, treeless moorland. Before it, a sheer drop of 200 feet to the churning Atlantic. A highly defensible position, Holmes noted. A prison, Sherlock. When Cadogan retreated there, I took the liberty of establishing a cordon. I employed the absolute best men from the special branch. They are stationed on the moorland road, the only road leading to the manor. The estate is completely surrounded. No one goes in, and no one comes out. The local postmaster is in our pay. Not a single letter or telegram has been dispatched. The telegraph wires to the house were accidentally severed by a falling branch a fortnight ago. We have a revenue cutter patrolling the waters below the cliff, ensuring no boat can approach the rocks. Cadogan lives entirely alone, save for a deaf and nearly blind housekeeper who has been with the family for 50 years and who we have thoroughly cleared. And yet, Holmes prompted, his eyes gleaming with the light of the chase. And yet, Sherlock, the leaks continue. 3 days ago, a detailed schematic of our new tube design, a document which was delivered to Cadogan at Blackwater Manor by our own trusted courier purely as a test, was confirmed to have reached a known foreign operative in London. It was transmitted from the manor. But how? The roads are heavily guarded, the cliffs are impassable, the sea is blocked. The man is completely isolated. Could he be signalling the lighthouse? I suggested. A flashing light from a window? A logical thought, Doctor, Mycroft replied. But a flashing light cannot transmit the complex architectural schematics of a torpedo tube without hours of continuous signalling, which our watchers on the moor would easily observe. Furthermore, we have investigated the lighthouse keeper, a man named Trevithick. He is a staunch, simple man, utterly devoted to his duties, with no ties to anyone outside the local village. He barely speaks English, let alone German. Moreover, the schematics in London were proven to be photographic copies. Photographic? Holmes asked sharply, springing from his chair. Yes, it is the work of a highly sophisticated foreign intelligence apparatus. They're utilizing micro-photographic film, what the French sometimes call pellicules. The documents are photographed and reduced to an infinitesimal size, barely larger than a postage stamp, completely waterproofed and easily concealable. Cadogan is supplied with this photographic apparatus. We suspect he took it with him to Cornwall, but the question remains, how is he getting the physical microfilm out of the heavily guarded manor and past the lighthouse roads? Holmes began to pace the room with quick, nervous strides, his hands clasped behind his back, his chin sunk upon his breast. For a long time the only sound in the room was the ticking of the grandfather clock and the howling of the wind outside. "He does not use the road," Holmes said finally, stopping before his brother. "He does not use a boat. He does not use a telegraph. He is isolated, Sherlock, a veritable Robinson Crusoe." "No man is an island, Mycroft, especially not a traitor with a deadline. If the land and the sea are barred, we are left with the air." "A balloon?" I cried. "Too conspicuous, Watson. It would be at the mercy of the wind, and Mycroft's revenue cutter would spot it instantly. No, it must be something smaller, something purposeful, something that can navigate the treacherous winds of the Cornish coast without arousing suspicion. Holmes turned his piercing gaze upon his brother. "Mycroft, does Lord Cadogan's study face the sea?" "It does. It is situated on the second floor, a large bay window overlooking the cliffs and the ocean toward the Blackwater Lighthouse." "And the guards, are they positioned to see this window?" "They are positioned on the moorland side, facing the front and sides of the property. To observe the sea-facing window, one would have to suspend oneself over the sheer cliff face in the dark." Holmes smiled, a thin, dangerous smile. "Excellent. Watson, consult the railway guide. When is the next express to Plymouth and onward to Penzance?" "There is a train from Paddington at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning," I replied, tracing the timetable with my finger. "Book us 2 first-class tickets," Holmes instructed. He turned to Mycroft. "Brother, I shall require a letter of authority granting me absolute command over your special branch men on the moor. Furthermore, I shall need a complete suspension of any patrols by the revenue cutter near Blackwater Rock for the next 48 hours. Mycroft's heavy brows drew together. "Suspend the sea patrol. Sherlock, that is the only thing preventing a submarine from surfacing and retrieving the documents." "A submarine in those rocky shoals, battered by a spring gale?" "I think not," Holmes chuckled. "Trust me, Mycroft. The sea must be clear for my experiment to succeed. We depart tomorrow. I fancy that the sea air will do us both a world of good, Watson, and I have a sudden overpowering desire to study the maritime ornithology of the Cornish coast." The journey to Cornwall was a long and arduous one. As the train rattled westward, leaving the sprawling smoke of London behind, the landscape gave way to the rolling green hills of the West Country, and finally to the rugged stone-walled bleakness of the Cornish moors. Throughout the journey, Holmes was uncharacteristically silent, sitting with his eyes closed and his long legs stretched out, an unlit pipe resting upon his lower lip. It was not until we had changed trains at Plymouth and were winding our way along the dramatic, sea-swept coastline that he finally spoke. "Tell me, Watson," he said suddenly, opening his eyes and fixing them upon me. "What do you know of the Japanese art of ukai?" "Ukai," I repeated, entirely bewildered by this sudden shift in topic. "I cannot say I have ever heard the term. Is it a form of martial art?" Holmes laughed softly. "Not quite, my dear doctor. It is an ancient and highly refined method of fishing. The Japanese fishermen of the Nagara River utilize trained birds, specifically the great cormorant. The bird is tethered, and a small snare is tied loosely around the base of its throat. The cormorant dives into the water, catches a fish, but is prevented from swallowing it by the snare. It returns to the fisherman's boat, where the fish is retrieved. It is a brilliant, symbiotic relationship, capitalizing upon the bird's natural instincts." "That is fascinating, Holmes. But what on earth does a Japanese fishing technique have to do with a treasonous politician in Cornwall?" "Perhaps nothing," Holmes replied enigmatically, turning his gaze back to the window. "But consider the cormorant, Watson, a creature of the sea, possessing extraordinary diving capabilities, immense stamina, and a remarkable homing instinct. It is an aerial vehicle capable of delivering a payload, completely indistinguishable from the thousands of other seabirds that populate this rugged coast. What guard, standing watch upon a desolate moor, would pay any mind to a dark bird winging its way from the cliffs to the sea?" A chill passed through me as the brilliance of Holmes's insinuation took hold. "You believe Cadogan is using a trained bird as a courier?" "It is a working hypothesis. We must eliminate the impossible, Watson. A human courier cannot pass the guards. A mechanical device would be spotted or lost. But a trained cormorant, equipped with a tiny waterproof capsule containing microphotographic film. It could effortlessly bypass the heaviest guard, travel swiftly to a designated retrieval point, perhaps an accomplice posing as a fisherman, or even the lighthouse itself, and return for its reward." We arrived at the small village of Penzeath just as the sun was setting, casting a violent, bloody hue across the tumultuous surface of the Atlantic. The village was a bleak collection of slate-roofed cottages huddled together against the incessant wind. We were met at the station by Inspector Gregson of Scotland Yard, who had been seconded to Mycroft's operation. Gregson, normally a man of stolid confidence, looked deeply weathered and profoundly frustrated. "Mr. Holmes," he said, shaking my friend's hand vigorously, "I am uncommonly glad to see you. This case is making a mockery of us. We have the house locked up tighter than the Bank of England. A mouse couldn't slip through the heather without my men spotting it. Yet Whitehall tells me the leaks continue." "I have no doubt of your vigilance, Gregson," Holmes replied soothingly. "Your men are guarding the ground perfectly. It is the geometry of your watch that is flawed." "Geometry, Mr. Holmes? You are watching the horizontal plane. You must learn to look up. Take us to the cordon." We travelled by a hired pony trap along a rutted track that wound its way up onto the high moor. The wind here was a physical force, howling off the sea and tearing at our heavy ulsters. As we reached the crest of the hill, the imposing silhouette of Blackwater Manor appeared against the darkening sky. It was a massive Gothic structure of dark grey stone, situated precariously on the very edge of the precipice. Beyond it, the vast black emptiness of the ocean stretched out to the horizon, broken only by the rhythmic piercing sweep of the light from the Blackwater Rock Lighthouse, standing desolate amidst the foaming breakers a mile offshore. Gregson showed us his men, stationed in hidden dips in the moorland, forming an impenetrable semicircle around the landward side of the estate. Holmes inspected their positions with a critical eye, asking brief, pointed questions about their lines of sight and the schedule of the patrols. He then turned his attention to the manor itself. "The study, Gregson? Which window?" Gregson pointed to a large unlit oriel window on the second floor, facing the sea. "That one, sir. It juts out over the cliff face. It is impossible to observe from our positions without standing on thin air." "And the drop beneath it?" "Sheer rock, straight down to the sea, 200 feet at least. The water at the base is a boiling cauldron of jagged reefs. No boat could survive there, Mr. Holmes. The only safe harbour for a mile is the reinforced landing at the Blackwater Rock Lighthouse itself." "Excellent," Holmes murmured. "The perfect locked room. Gregson, I require you to maintain your watch exactly as before. Do not alter your patrols. Watson and I have a bit of rock climbing ahead of us." "Rock climbing? In this dark? With this wind?" Gregson cried, horrified. "It's madness, Mr. Holmes. The cliff is treacherous." "The game is afoot, Gregson. The stakes demand a certain level of risk." Holmes produced a coil of strong, thin climbing rope and a pair of dark lanterns from the Gladstone bag we had brought from London. Leaving the bewildered Gregson behind, We skirted the edge of the cordon, moving carefully through the gorse and heather until we reached the very edge of the cliff, some 50 yards to the left of the manor. The sound of the sea crashing against the rocks below was deafening, a continuous thunderous roar that shook the very ground beneath our boots. The wind tore at my breath as I peered over the edge into the dizzying black abyss. "Holmes, this is suicide!" I shouted over the gale. "Nonsense, Watson. There is a narrow ledge that runs along the cliff face, about 20 feet below the rim. I studied the geological survey maps on the train. We must traverse that ledge until we are positioned directly beneath Lord Cadogan's study window. We shall tie ourselves together, Alpine fashion." With a calm precision that belied the terrifying circumstances, Holmes secured the rope around my waist and his own. He went over the edge first, his lithe, athletic frame finding footholds in the crumbling slate with the agility of a mountain goat. I followed, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The descent was a nightmare. The wind threatened to tear us from the rock at every moment, and the freezing spray from the crashing waves below coated the stone in a treacherous, slippery rime. For what seemed like an eternity, we inched our way along the narrow, crumbling ledge, our backs pressed tightly against the cliff face, until Holmes suddenly halted. "Here, Watson!" he shouted, his voice barely audible over the wind. "We are directly beneath the window." We crouched on a slightly wider outcropping of rock. 20 feet above us, the large, dark window of the study loomed. We settled down to wait, shrouded in the darkness, the cold seeping into our very bones. The hours dragged by with agonizing slowness. I was shivering violently, my hands numb and aching from gripping the rough stone. Holmes, however, remained as still and unyielding as a gargoyle, his eyes fixed intently upon the window above us. The sweeping beam of the lighthouse intermittently illuminated his sharp, focused features, revealing a hunter entirely consumed by the stalk. It was shortly past 2 in the morning when the change occurred. Above us, the heavy curtains of the study window were suddenly parted, and a warm, yellow light spilled out into the darkness, casting an elongated rectangle of illumination upon the turbulent sea. I heard the muffled sound of a latch being thrown, and the window was pushed open. Holmes gripped my arm tightly. "Watch, Watson," he hissed. In the glow of the window I could see the silhouette of a man, tall, distinguished, with a prominent nose and a shock of white hair. It was Lord Cadogan. He stood at the open window for a moment, peering out into the darkness. Then he raised a small, powerful dark lantern and flashed it 3 times toward the sea. Short, rapid flashes. He waited. 5 minutes passed. Then, out of the howling darkness of the seaward gale, a shape appeared. It was large, swift, and completely silent. It swept out of the night, its dark wings beating against the wind, and landed with a distinct fleshy slap upon the stone sill of the open window. It was a massive bird, as black as the night itself, with a long, sinuous neck and a sharp, hooked beak. A great cormorant. "Astounding," I breathed. Lord Cadogan reached out and grasped the bird. It did not struggle. With practised, hurried movements, he detached a small, gleaming, cylindrical object from a leather harness secured around the bird's neck. He pocketed it, then drew a second identical cylinder from his own pocket and fastened it to the harness. Finally, he reached into a bucket on the floor, produced a silver-scaled fish, and fed it to the bird. With a low, guttural croak, the Cormorant turned, launched itself from the sill, and plummeted back down into the darkness. Cadogan closed the window and drew the curtains. "The exchange is made," Holmes whispered, his voice vibrating with triumph. "The secrets are in the air. Now, Watson, the trap." From his coat, Holmes produced an object he had fashioned earlier that day at the inn, a heavy, weighted cast net of the type used by local fishermen, modified with a drawstring. "We must catch it on its return," Holmes explained rapidly. "The bird will take the microfilm to its handler. I am certain now that the lighthouse keeper Trevithick is the true enemy agent, suborned by foreign gold. Safe upon his rock, he receives the film, waits for the weather to clear, and passes it to a waiting vessel before sending the bird back with instructions." "But how will we catch it in this wind?" "The cormorant is a creature of habit. It will return to the window for its final reward. We must intercept it before it reaches Cadogan. Prepare your lantern, Watson. When I give the word, shine it directly upward to blind the creature." We waited another hour. The cold was now excruciating, but the thrill of the chase had warmed my blood. Suddenly, Holmes tensed. The sound of flapping wings cut through the roar of the sea. "Now, Watson!" I threw open the shutter of my dark lantern, aiming the beam straight up. The brilliant shaft of light caught the massive cormorant mid-flight as it beat its way upward toward the study window. The sudden, blinding glare startled the creature. It squawked, stalled in the air, and dropped its altitude slightly. In that fraction of a second, Holmes moved. With a powerful, sweeping throw, he cast the weighted net upward. The leaden weights flared out, and the heavy mesh enveloped the bird. With a frantic, thrashing explosion of feathers and a terrified cry, the cormorant plummeted down onto our narrow ledge. Holmes threw himself upon the struggling mass, his hands skillfully avoiding the razor-sharp beak. "I have him, Watson! Secure the capsule!" I scrambled over, holding the lantern steady. Amidst the terrifying tangle of black wings and netting, I found the small leather harness around the bird's thick neck. Attached to it was a tiny, meticulously crafted capsule of lightweight aluminium, sealed with rubber. I unclipped it with trembling fingers. "I have it, Holmes." "Excellent. Release the net. The bird has done nothing to warrant a fall into the sea." Holmes carefully loosened the drawstring. The cormorant, furiously indignant, burst free, snapped its beak at the empty air, and launched itself out over the precipice, disappearing instantly into the storm. Holmes sat back against the cliff face, holding the tiny aluminum capsule between his thumb and forefinger. He smiled grimly. "The secrets of the dreadnought class, Watson. Bound for Berlin, but detained on the Cornish coast. Let us pay a midnight call upon Lord Cadogan. I believe he has an appointment with the gallows." The ascent was far more perilous than the descent, our muscles fatigued and our fingers numb, but the adrenaline of our success carried us over the rim. We bypassed Gregson's men entirely and approached the heavy oak front doors of Blackwater Manor. Holmes did not bother to knock. With a whispered caution for silence, he produced a slender set of lockpicks from his waistcoat pocket. Within seconds there was a soft click, and he pushed the heavy door open without a sound. We raced up the grand staircase to the second floor, bursting into the study. Lord Cadogan, who had been sitting at his mahogany desk, leapt to his feet, his face draining of all colour. The room smelled strongly of expensive brandy and remarkably of raw fish. "What is the meaning of this outrage?" Cadogan roared, though his voice trembled. "Who are you?" "I am Sherlock Holmes," my friend said coldly, stepping into the room and levelling his revolver. "And I represent the interests of the British government. I believe you are missing your feathered friend, Lord Cadogan." Holmes tossed the tiny aluminum capsule onto the desk. It landed with a sharp clink upon the mahogany. Cadogan stared at it, his pale face twitching, before a sudden mask of aristocratic indignation fell over his features. "What is this trinket, sir, and how dare you break into my private residence? I shall have you thrown in jail for this outrage." "Save your bluster for the jury, Cadogan," Holmes replied smoothly, his eyes cold and hard. "We have intercepted your avian courier." At those words, Cadogan opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came. His knees buckled, and he collapsed back into his chair, a broken, ruined man. "You are a traitor to your sovereign and your country, sir," Holmes continued, his voice ringing with absolute condemnation. "You have utilized a brilliantly wicked method to bypass the security placed upon you. Microphotographic film transported by a trained Cormorant to the Blackwater Lighthouse. I deduce that Trevithick, the lighthouse keeper, was your accomplice. Stationed securely upon Blackwater Rock, immune to the naval blockade and the dangerous reefs, he was perfectly positioned to receive the bird, hide the film, and pass it to a foreign vessel when the storms abated." Cadogan buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "It was the debts," he whispered hoarsely. "They found out about the gold mines. They threatened to ruin me. They provided the camera. The bird, they taught me how to signal it, how to feed it." "Your confession will save us a great deal of trouble at the Old Bailey," Holmes said severely. He stepped to the window and threw it open, signalling to the moorland with his own lantern. Within minutes, Inspector Gregson and a dozen heavy-footed special branch men stormed into the room, their faces masks of astonishment. "Mr. Holmes!" Gregson cried, looking from the shattered door to the weeping lord. "What has happened?" "The leak is sealed, Gregson," Holmes said, holstering his revolver. "You will find the photographic apparatus concealed somewhere in this room. I suggest you take this man into custody. He has a great deal to confess." 3 days later, we were back in the comfortable, familiar surroundings of 221B Baker Street. The spring storms had finally abated, leaving London bathed in a pale, tentative sunlight. Holmes was reclining upon the sofa, his eyes closed, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin. "It was a triumph of the obscure over the obvious, Watson," he remarked, breaking a long silence. "Mycroft's men were looking for a man, a carriage, a boat. They were blinded by their own expectations. The criminal mind, when driven by desperation and aided by significant resources, will always seek the path of least resistance. The air was unguarded. The Cormorant was the perfect vessel." "But how on earth did they train the bird so perfectly?" I asked, setting down my newspaper, which was currently ablaze with the sudden, unexplained resignation of Lord Cadogan from the Admiralty due to ill health. "It is a marvel of animal conditioning," Holmes replied, his eyes snapping open. "The foreign agents who orchestrated this scheme must have imported a master of ukai from Japan. They adapted the technique. Instead of a snare to prevent swallowing a fish, they used the fish as the reward for delivering the capsule." The bird was trained to fly between the window and the lighthouse. A flash of light was the signal. It is a testament, Watson, to the terrifying ingenuity of the modern spy. And the accomplice at the lighthouse? Mycroft dispatched his special branch men to the rock at dawn. They found Trevithick attempting to destroy his photographic chemicals. He is currently residing in a cell next to Cadogan's. The line of transmission is completely severed, and the dreadnought's secrets are safe. Holmes reached for his violin, his bow dancing lightly across the strings. "I must admit, Watson," he said softly, a rare smile playing about his thin lips, "I feel a pang of regret for the Cormorant. A noble, intelligent creature, conscripted into a game of empires it could not possibly comprehend. Still, it flies free over the Cornish coast tonight, while its master contemplates the stark walls of the tower. A fitting end, I think, to one of the most singular problems it has ever been my privilege to solve." And with that Sherlock Holmes closed his eyes, and the melancholic strains of a Mendelssohn sonata filled the room, washing away the lingering taint of treason and the roaring memory of the Cornish sea. Thanks for joining me for another original mystery. Do not forget to check out our Patreon down below to support the channel.